Chapter 1402. Sunny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened and looked around. The chain breaker was laying on white sand, tilted awkwardly. It had shattered the side of a black cliff and was now leaning on it, which prevented the ship from turning over. They had gotten lucky despite the blind landing. The fog was still there, obscuring the world, but it had become less thick. Sunny could make out the figure of Saint standing still on the bow of the grounded vessel, as well as more cliffs rising high above them. It seemed that Nephi's had guided the chain breaker to a small sand beach at the very edge of the island. Neph herself was leaning heavily on the steering oars, drained of essence. Sunny grimaced. It was inevitable, but we should be careful not to receive any serious wounds. She won't be able to heal us any time soon. Nephi's, meanwhile, had already regained her composure. I'm fine, I can still put up a fight. Well, of course you can, I have no doubt about that. After exchanging a few words with them, Cassie used the guiding light to make it point in the direction where Effie supposedly was. Or her lifeless body, or something else entirely. Sunny couldn't suppress his anxiety anymore. He scowled and took a step forward, ready to leap down to the beach. That gluttonous woman, she'd better be alive, or else I'll be very cross with her. Jumping over the railing, he plummeted down and landed on the sand. A moment later, Nephi's was by his side. Saint and Fiend landed with a bit more noise than the two of them, and lastly, Nightmare leaped from the deck of the ship, carrying Cassie on his back. The six of them remained motionless for a few moments, listening to the silence of Windflower. There were no sounds around them, no movement. Only the soft white sand and the black cliffs faintly visible in the fog. A piece of rock fell from the shattered crag and rolled down, the noise both dampened and made louder by the mist. It echoed, making them tense. Feeling very uncomfortable because of how suppressed both his vision and shadow sense were, Sunny took a step forward. As he did, a human figure suddenly revealed itself from the murky veil of the fog. He flinched and tensed, ready to attack, but then froze. Black eyes, porcelain skin, the sin of Solace looked at him contemptuously and spat. God's this again, I'm so sick of it. Sunny gritted his teeth and walked past the damned sword wraith. But then he lingered for a moment. Suddenly, a strange sense of déjà vu overcame him. Why did he feel as if the sin of Solace was supposed to say something else? Shaking his head, Sunny ignored the loathsome apparition and headed straight for the cliffs. Less than an hour later, he was writhing on the ground, overwhelmed by unbearable agony. His lightless soul was mutilated and slowly falling apart. As Sunny arduously rose to one knee, a cold gaze pierced him from above. No, no, no. Then a ghostly blade pierced his chest. Sunny died. Sunny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened and looked around. The chain breaker was laying on white sand, tilted awkwardly. Nephi's was leaning heavily on the steering oars, utterly drained of essence. We should be careful not to get wounded until she recovers some essence. She straightened slowly and said in a tired voice, I'm fine, I can still put up a fight. Well, of course you can. You're changing star of the immortal Flame Clan. They exchanged a few words with Cassie, who then used the guiding light to point them in the direction where Effie was supposed to be. Soon, Sunny jumped down to the beach, followed by the rest of his companions. That gluttonous woman, she'd better be alive, or else I'll be very cross with her. Feeling vulnerable in the swirling mist, he scowled and took a step forward. As he did, a human figure suddenly revealed itself from the murky veil of the fog. Sunny flinched and tensed, ready to attack, but then froze. Black eyes, porcelain skin, the sin of Solace was glaring at him without even trying to conceal his hatred. You are such a pathetic, odious, revolting coward. Just die already, die, gods, this is unbearable. Sonny gritted his teeth and walked past the damned sword wraith, heading for the cliffs. He was suddenly overcome by a strange sense of déjà vu. Weird, what did that bastard say? Banishing the thought of the damnable sword wraith from his head, he continued forward. Soon after, a ghostly blade pierced his chest. Sonny died in agony. Sonny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened and looked around. The chain breaker was laying on white sand, tilted awkwardly. Nephi's was leaning on the steering oars, utterly drained of essence. A minute or two later, he jumped down to the beach and headed to the cliffs. As he did, a pale apparition suddenly appeared from the mist, scaring him. The Sin of Solace laughed. Damn, it was fun at the start, but now I've already lost count. Ignoring the odious wraith, Sonny continued walking. He was suddenly overwhelmed by a strange sense of déjà vu, but dismissed it. Not long after that, his soul was destroyed by the ruthless blade of undying slaughter. Sonny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened and looked around. Sonny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened and looked around. Sonny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened and looked around. He died in agony. He died in agony. He died in agony. He died. The chain breaker was laying on white sand, tilted awkwardly. Nephi's was leaning on the steering oars, utterly drained of essence. After Cassie used the guiding light to point them in the direction where Effie was supposed to be, Sonny jumped down to the beach and headed toward the cliffs. As he did, a pale apparition appeared from the mist and scared him. The Sin of Solace glared at him silently, not saying anything. What is up with that bastard? Ignoring the loathsome wraith, Sonny walked past and advanced cautiously through the fog. A strange sense of déjà vu suddenly overwhelmed him, but he dismissed it. Slow and steady, slow and steady. However, something was still gnawing on his mind. Scowling, Sonny stopped, lingered for a few moments and turned around. Hey you, weren't you going to say something? Nephi's looked at him with a hint of surprise. Are you talking to your sword? Sonny nodded and continued staring at the Sin of Solace, who silently glared at him back. Why do I feel so strange? He remained motionless for a while, his expression growing darker. Eventually, Sonny uttered a curse and shook his head. Hold on, I think something is not right. Because of Sonny, they spent more time near the chain breaker than they had planned. However, he simply couldn't tell what it was that had made him feel so uncomfortable. After a while, there was no choice but to head for the cliffs. Cassie rode Nightmare at the front of the group, Sonny and Nephi's followed, while Saint and Fiend were defending the rear. As they walked, Sonny remained silent, a deep frown on his face. I feel strange. It was as if he had taken these steps before. The white sand, the swirling mist, the black edifices of the tall cliffs, it all felt eerily familiar. What is going on? Eventually, they discovered a line of footprints in the sand. Sonny should have felt surprised and curious, but he barely paid the mysterious discovery any attention, as if it was only natural for the footprints to be there. Those were left by a human. He shivered slightly and looked at Nephi's. How had he known that she would say these exact words? Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then said quietly, "Wait here." Why did he feel almost obligated to respond that way? Deeply disturbed, Sonny left one of his shadows behind and followed the line of footprints to the edge of the island. There were so many questions he should have been asking himself, like who had left these traces? Had that person really jumped into the abyssal chasm, or had they survived and escaped the suffocating mist? But instead, Sonny was mostly thinking about why it felt as if he had already visited the edge of the island before. The Sin of Solace was there, as well, glaring at him silently. Why is he not saying anything? I feel like he should have said something already, like encourage me to jump too. Scowling, Sonny returned to Nephi's and Cassie. The footprints lead to the edge of the island. I didn't find anything else, so let's trace them in the other direction." When they nodded and prepared to set out, he suddenly added, "Wait, don't you feel that something is strange?" Nephi's looked at him with her usual impassive expression. "Everything here is strange." Sunny had no choice but to agree. It was a stupid question. To begin with, of course, everything felt strange on a mystical island hidden behind a barrier of a colossal whirlpool. They continued forward and eventually reached stone steps leading up the hills. Fiend took the lead, and the group cautiously started the ascent. As they walked, Sunny couldn't shake off the feeling that these steps looked eerily familiar. Just what the hell is going on with me? Am I under some kind of mind hex again? By now, Sunny's resistance to mental attack was rather high. Even the sin of solace, a transcendent memory of the fifth tier, was having trouble driving him truly and utterly insane. He did not doubt that there were beings in the tomb of Ariel that could shatter his defenses, but he did doubt that there was something here that could do so without him noticing. Then what is it? Looking up, he noticed that Nephi's was staring intently at the stone steps. She must have noticed that they are not weathered at all, as if the seeker who had lived on the island created them just yesterday. Wait, when had he come to these conclusions himself? It just seemed so obvious. As Sunny froze, feeling very confused, one of the scouting shadows suddenly heard the sound of steel clashing against steel, followed by a pained scream. He didn't feel surprised at all, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. The black crow that had been sitting on his shoulder suddenly dashed into the fog. Was that Jet's voice? Why did thinking about Jet fill him with a cold sense of dread? Sunny. Cassie and Nephi's had noticed his dazed state. He lingered for a moment. Someone is fighting in the forest about 4 kilometers from the top of the stairs. It should be Jet. I'm going. The words left his mouth as if he had rehearsed them. Nephi's nodded. We'll be right. Without listening to her response, Sunny dove into the shadows. Something is wrong, something is wrong. He knew that he was taking a dire risk by rushing blindly into the forest. Windflower was too dangerous of a place to behave rashly. Sunny had no idea what enemy he was going to face, was diving into battle without having made any preparations, and did not hold any initiative at all. But Jet was going to die if he delayed even for a moment. Somehow, he was sure of it. Stepping out of the shadow deep within the forest, Sunny gritted his teeth and dashed forward. It's just one of those situations where I only have bad choices. It's going to be all right, though. I've survived all the previous gambles, so I'll pull through this time as well. But then he felt a chilling terror grasp his heart. Would he really pull through? Or would he die miserably after finally losing a gamble? Bursting onto a wide clearing, Sunny slid on the moss and came to halt close to its middle. The smell of blood permeated the air here, both frightening and familiar. Where is she? Where is she? Looking around, he noticed someone laying on the ground, their motionless figure buried in the mist. Dashing there, Sunny fell to his knees and stared down with wide eyes. Jet, it was Jet. Her black leather armor seemed unbroken, but her beautiful face was contorted in a grimace of terrible agony. The moss was greedily drinking blood that flowed from the terrible wound where her arm had been viciously severed. Curse it all. Sensing his presence, Jet slowly opened her eyes. Her lips moved weakly. Sunny B. Behind me in the fog. Before Jet finished her warning, he was already jumping to his feet and spinning around. There was a vague shape moving in the mist. Because of how quickly Sunny had reacted, he had no trouble dodging its strike. The sin of solace hissed, slicing the figure apart. That won't do anything. Why did he think that? Right, seemingly woven out of mist, ethereal, elusive. It had to be a wraith of some kind, meaning that physical attacks would be ineffective against it. It seemed that Sunny's subconscious had discerned the insidious nature of the enemy faster than his conscious mind did. For this battle, he had to discard the Jade Giant and summon the cruel sight instead. A split second later, the mist wraith seemed to dissipate into the swirling fog. Sunny could not sense its presence at all, which meant that the abomination could attack at any moment from any direction. Letting go of the sin of solace, he called upon the somber spear. Now, he just had to survive until it was summoned. No, I'm missing something. Sunny froze in place, torn between the dire need to be absolutely focused and the gnawing feeling that he was forgetting something terribly, terribly important. What is it? He couldn't allow himself to get distracted. A moment of inattention could mean death. Focus. His other two scouting shadows, gloomy and happy, were going to reach the clearing in a few seconds. Only when his body was augmented by all 5 shadows would he have the luxury of sparing some thought to the gnawing feeling. Jet's hoarse voice resounded from below, faltering and weak. Sunny, careful, she's... He looked down and then. Sunny was suddenly, inexplicably calm. His lips moved. She's you. The cruel sight finally manifested itself into existence. The happy shadow flew into the clearing. The mist wraith, undying slaughter, was already there, waiting for it. A terrible agony tore Sunny's soul apart. Falling to his knees, he heard the spell whispers and thought, "Your shadow has been destroyed. Your shadow has been destroyed. Your shadow core has been destroyed. Your shadow core has been destroyed." Now gloomy. Another flash of indescribable torment pierced his existence, throwing Sunny to the ground. Writhing in pain, he struggled to stand up. I knew this would happen. How did I know? Finally, he managed to rise to one knee. The mist was suddenly unbearably cold, causing his body to shiver. Sunny raised his head and saw 2 icy blue eyes looking down at him. I am going to die now. The ghostly blade pierced his chest. Sunny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened and looked around. The chain breaker was laying on white sand, tilted awkwardly. The forest clearing was gone. The bleeding, broken figure of Jet was gone. The corpses of his shadows were gone, too. But he remembered it all clearly. The misty shore, the black cliffs, the cold twilight of the pine forest, the dread of dying on his knees. I died. But he had not. Otherwise, how would he be standing here on the deck of the chain breaker? Neff and Cassie must have saved me somehow and retreated back to the ship. It was at that moment that he heard Neff's voice. I'm fine, I can still put up a fight. Sunny flinched and stared at her with a deadpan expression. What did you just say? She raised an eyebrow. I said I can still fight. Sunny continued to stare at her silently. His mind was utterly empty. These are the exact words she said when we first landed on the island. No, not just her words. Everything is exactly the same. He looked around again, noting every small detail of their surroundings. He was right. It was as if the last hour had never happened. As if Sunny had returned to the past. He slowly raised a hand and ran it across his face. What the hell is going on? It's exactly the same. The chain breaker was leaning on a broken cliff, the mist swirling around it. Saint was standing motionlessly at the bow of the ship. Nephi's had just stated that she would still be able to fight despite exhausting all her essence. Sunny looked at her, then shifted slightly and threw a glance at Cassie. The last time, I noticed her troubled expression and asked if there was something wrong. She explained how her instincts were screaming of danger. He hesitated for a few moments and kept silent. Nephi's, however, did not. Noting that Cassie seemed concerned about something, she asked evenly, Have you sensed something? The blind girl shook her head with a frown. Nothing specific. I just have a very ominous feeling. This place, wind, flower, every part of me is screaming that we are in danger. Sonny's eyes widened slightly. The wording had changed a little, but it was almost exactly the same response. How? While Nephi's and Cassie went about locating the direction where Effie supposedly was with the help of the guiding light, he observed them without saying anything. His mind was strangely split between two extremes. One part of it had turned cold and analytical, driven into a heightened state of utmost vigilance. The other was shaken and distraught, still reeling from the agony of dying to the ghostly blade. The shock of remembering his harrowing demise was so visceral that Sonny wanted nothing more than to topple to the deck and curl into a shivering ball. Perhaps he had only managed to remain standing because he was frozen stiff. "Sonny, let's go if you don't mind." He flinched and glanced at Nephi's. She was already leaping over the railing. Still slow to react, Sonny watched as Cassie awkwardly climbed on top of Nightmare and settled in the saddle. With her small stature, it was not that easy to accomplish. I should adjust the stirrups. That ordinary thought finally broke his dazed state. Commanding his shadows to disembark, he walked over to the edge of the deck and jumped down. He was the last one to set foot on the white sand of the misty beach. I really seem to have traveled to the past. Or is it an illusion? Then again, that vision of death might have been an illusion instead. A vision. Did I receive a prophetic vision meant for Cassie somehow? His mind was in turmoil. Which was why Sonny flinched and took a step back when a human figure suddenly revealed itself from the fog. He had completely forgotten about the sin of solace. Right, that bastard scared me the last time too. Now he's going to glare at me silently. The sin of solace did, indeed, glared at him silently for a moment. But then the apparition smirked and said in a contemptuous tone, "You know, I am actually starting to enjoy this. Let's go for another round, shall we?" Sonny looked at him in surprise. Apart from minute changes that had happened because of his inaction, this was the first thing that went differently than how it had in the previous round. A slight frown appeared on Sonny's face. Why is the bastard the only exception to the rule? Walking past the apparition, he said quietly, "Sure, let's go for another round." The wraith stared at him in surprise. As they advanced through the mist, discovered the line of footsteps in the sand, and continued toward the cliffs, Sonny was thinking feverishly. Is it an illusion, or have I really traveled in time? If it's the latter, then why? And what do I do now that I have? There was too much to think about and not enough time. His mental state was in shambles as well. Sonny vaguely realized that he was still in shock, but didn't know what to do about it. He was probably missing a lot of vital things in this rattled condition. For example, suddenly, Sonny felt incredibly cold. How have I not thought about that? They were already ascending the stone steps, which meant that Jet was going to be attacked by undying slaughter in a matter of minutes. Seconds. Curse it. His mind ignited. Thinking as fast and best as he could, Sonny cursed himself for being such a fool. He wasted almost an entire hour trying to understand why he had been sent into the past instead of considering how to deal with the future. Even if he was in shock after having his soul torn apart and dying in agony, there was no excuse. What do I do now? He remembered his naive thoughts bitterly. He would pull through again somehow. It was just another gamble. It seems I have finally become arrogant. And paid a heavy price for it, the heaviest price there could be. Doesn't matter. There's no time to feel regret. I need to decide what to do now. A small, cowardly part of him instantly had an answer. The safest thing to do was to abandon Jet and save himself from having to face undying slaughter. He knew that he would die in that clearing, so why go there at all? But even knowing the danger, he couldn't let Jet die. Go there and fight then. It was not such a foolish thought. The reason why Sonny had lost the last time around was because he had dove into the battle blind and without making any preparations. Now, however, he knew exactly what enemy he would be facing, and although there was very little time left before the clash, he could at least prepare a few things. I still don't know enough about Undying Slaughter. Fighting her now would be unwise, but he did not really need to. All he had to do was grab Jet and run. At that point, the shadow he had sent to scout ahead finally heard it. The sound of clashing steel, followed by Soul Reaper's pained scream. Sonny gritted his teeth. Let's do this. Dismissing the sin of solace, Sonny called upon the cruel sight and looked at Nephi's. There was no time to explain everything, but he still had to warn them in advance. What to say? How would he even explain a situation like that? Not finding any good words, Sonny just said what came to mind. I found Jet. She is being attacked by a powerful enemy, a wraith-like creature capable of dealing damage directly to our souls. I'll try to get Jet and retreat, prepare for battle. Before she had time to respond, Sonny already dove into the shadows. The reason I died was because I lost the initiative by not knowing the nature of the enemy and not having the correct weapon to deal with a wraith immediately at hand. Most importantly, I failed to realize that my shadows would be vulnerable to Undying Slaughter's attacks as well. He had dodged the first attack of the Defiled without too much trouble. It was unknown which one of them would have lost in the end after the cruel sight had manifested itself in a normal fight. However, Undying Slaughter had moved to destroy his shadows first. It was no surprise that she had known just how to kill him in one fell swoop. After all, the Mist Wraith was most likely a defiled version of Soul Reaper Jet using her future transformation ability. Jet knew a lot about his aspect, and the future Jet would have known even more. That had been Sonny's undoing. After a vast part of his soul had been destroyed, he was in no condition to put up any further resistance. So, he died miserably on his knees. This time was going to be different. First, he had already summoned the cruel sight. Second, he would protect his shadows. And lastly, he knew a lot about Jet's aspect as well. Stepping out of the shadow, he wrapped it around his body and dashed toward the clearing. The dormant ability allows her to absorb the essence of living beings she kills. The awakened ability allows her to strike directly at the souls of her enemies, bypassing all forms of physical defense. The ascended ability allows her to increase the size and capacity of her shattered soul core, as well as removing the limit on how much essence she can use to enhance her body. Sonny did not know how ancient Undying Slaughter really was, how distant was the future she had come from. However, her Frankenstein's monster of a soul core would have already reached an enormous size, considering how many people the 6 plagues had slaughtered. She was powerful. He also did not know much about her transcendent ability. It was most likely how Undying Slaughter had attacked him in the form of a wraith, but the details of her transformation were unclear. I should be able to get through this, as long as I'm careful. Or not. Bursting from the line of trees, Sonny ignited the silver blade of the cruel sight with divine flames and dashed toward where Jet was laying on the ground, her blood pouring into the moss. As he kneeled in front of her, tense and ready to fight, she opened her icy blue eyes and looked at him weakly. Her lips moved. Don't speak, I know. Now. Sonny did not have to kneel and show his back to the enemy. However, if he had the opportunity to fool Undying Slaughter into thinking that she had the upper hand, it would be criminal not to use it. Sensing an almost imperceptible disturbance in the mist, he shot to his feet and lashed out with the radiant blade of the cruel sight. There was a vague figure hidden in the fog, already moving to attack him, caught by surprise. It had no chance to avoid the sudden strike. And yet it did. Fast. Sonny pulled back his spear and froze, tensely observing the mist. Despite the fact that their roles had reversed, and he was the one to deliver an unexpected attack, the end result was the same. Undying slaughter had dissipated into the fog, and he was left not knowing where the next blow would come from. Or he would have, if not for the fact that he knew the future. Wrong. Sonny knew what would have happened, not what would happen. Him changing the opening exchange of the battle could have changed what undying slaughter would do as well. He still had to be careful. However, the next few seconds went just as they had before. The mist wraith did not attack him again, hiding and waiting, until the happy shadow flew from behind the trees and rushed toward its master. Sonny remembered the harrowing agony of having his soul torn apart and felt his hair stand on end. The mist swirled, and the wraith hiding within it moved to intercept the swift shadow. Damn it! Even knowing what was about to come, he couldn't suppress his fear. Undying slaughter brought its ghostly blade down, but before it could plunge into the shadow, it was met by another blade. This one made of pure darkness. As two ruby flames ignited in the depths of his shadow, Saint deflected the wraith's blow and stepped into the clearing. Blade of Darkness, ability description. The true darkness dwelling in this shadow's heart can be summoned in the form of a fearsome weapon, as long as the shadow has mastered the use of that weapon. The Blade of Darkness can slay those of flesh and those of spirit. It never dulls, never falters, and never breaks. Alternatively, the darkness can be summoned to augment a mundane weapon. Saint's dark sword could cut both tangible and intangible enemies, just like the cruel sight could. More than that, she was immune to soul damage, which made his taciturn shadow an almost perfect adversary for the hateful mist wraith. Even if undying slaughter was a defiled transcendent like the Mad Prince was, Saint was a transcendent devil. Their power, at least theoretically, was on par. Or so Sonny hoped. Faced with the dark blade, the mist wraith glided back. The next moment, a second shadow appeared in the clearing. Fiend jumped out of it, infernal flames burning in his eyes. The happy shadow wrapped itself around the graceful stone knight, while the gloomy one wrapped itself around the steel ogre. Sonny himself was augmented by the other three. Undying slaughter was caught in the middle of a triangle formed by Saint, Fiend, and Sonny. Let's see who will die now. Forcing himself to grin, Sonny gripped the cruel sight tighter and dashed forward. Sonny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened and looked around. The chain breaker was laying on white sand, tilted awkwardly. Damnation! His trembling fist collided with the railing and splintered the enchanted wood. He didn't feel the pain. Curse it all. Sonny, are you all right? Sonny lingered for a moment, took a labored breath, then looked himself over and slowly turned to Nephi's. His voice sounded hoarse. Yes, it seems that I am. In the end, he still lost to undying slaughter. The odds seemed to be in his favor. He successfully avoided having his shadows destroyed, summoned Saint and Fiend, and managed to wrestle the initiative from the ghostly claws of the mist wraith. However, the battle did not go how he had hoped it would. It ended in disaster, just like the previous time. Sonny had been almost certain that Saint would be immune to undying slaughter's soul attacks, and it turned out to be true, somewhat. It seemed that she could withstand much more damage than the rest of them, but even then, the ghostly blade was just as lethal to the taciturn knight as it was to Sonny and Fiend. The reason, as he belatedly realized, was the unique nature of Jet's aspect. Her attacks bypassed physical defenses and struck the soul, and yet, they were not true soul attacks. Instead, they were physical attacks that inexplicably dealt damage to the soul. How was one supposed to defend against that? The mightier one's soul was, the more it took to destroy it. Other than enduring the damage or avoiding being hit entirely, there was no other way, at least none that he knew of. Sadly, it was easier said than done. Saint's sword and the cruel sight were capable of blocking the ghostly blade of undying slaughter, but actually withstanding her dreadful assault was almost impossible. The mist wraith was astonishingly swift, devastatingly strong, and insidiously cunning on top of that. She was a truly abominable creature, and an inexplicable one, too. Sunny had just enough time to catch a glimpse of what hid in the darkness of her defiled soul, and what he saw left him reeling. Undying slaughter could be called a corrupted beast, since there was only one note of vile darkness infesting her soul. But that note was truly colossal in size, dwarfing any other corruption core he had even seen before. So, her actual power could very well be equal to a terror or a titan. Still, faced with Saint's resilient soul and two weapons that could both block and damage intangible beings, Undying Slaughter was at least forced to change tactics. After clashing with them a few times, the Mist Wraith silently discarded her ghostly form, turning back into a corporeal creature. If Sunny had ever had any doubt that the 6 plagues were the future version of the members of the cohort, they were instantly dispelled at that moment. Undying Slaughter looked more like a revenant, both dreadful and dreadfully beautiful, than a human being, but there was no way he could fail to recognize those icy blue eyes, that chilling presence, and the ruthless way in which she fought. She was truly Soul Reaper Jet, or rather had been once. Undying Slaughter might have been Jet once, but there was nothing human left in her merciless, mad eyes anymore. Once she assumed a corporeal form, Sunny was thrown into despair. His plan to stall the abomination while Fiend retreated with the real Jet was shattered almost instantly. Undying Slaughter read his intentions like an open book, and not only made following the plan impossible, but also cruelly turned it against Sunny. The initiative he had so arduously won was immediately lost when the Revenant aimed all her attacks at Jet instead of him, Saint, or Fiend. Forced to protect the gravely wounded companion, they had no choice but to follow her cadence and fall under her control. It was a simple, but viciously effective strategy. Considering how skilled, explosively fast, and terrifyingly strong Undying Slaughter was, the rest of the battle did not take long. Fiend's carapace of black silver, which Sunny considered nearly indestructible, was eventually pierced and violently split open, the infernal flames spilling out of horrid wounds like blood. The ravenous ogre collapsed with a frightened, confused howl and grew still. Saint's stone armor was shattered, her limbs were broken. Ruby dust flowed like a river, and although the taciturn knight tried to stand her ground, the ghostly blade eventually found its way into the narrow crack of her visor. The crimson glow of her ruby eyes was extinguished, and Saint crumbled to the ground, lifeless. The spell announced her death mournfully. Sunny thought that he would be next, but Undying Slaughter was not that kind. She made him watch Jet die before delivering the fatal blow. Back on the deck of the chain breaker, he closed his eyes. How can anyone fight that thing? I'm fine, I can still put up a fight. Sunny flinched and looked up. Nephi's must have mistaken the reason for his grim expression and repeated her usual words. It was just a coincidence. Suddenly he felt a strange sense of incongruity. Mere seconds ago, Sunny had been fighting for his life, watching his shadows die in fear and sorrow. He had watched Jet die as well. He had even died himself again. And yet, Nephi's and Cassie were behaving as if nothing had happened. Well, it had not for them. Sunny understood that, but he still couldn't help but feel ashamed, angry, and resentful. He lingered for a few moments, and then forced out a smile. Yeah, I can still put up a fight too. His smile widened slightly, growing both darker and more sincere. It was true. Sunny might have lost to Undying Slaughter again, but he acquired something extremely valuable from that loss. Looking around, he took in the sight of the swirling mist, white sand, and the black cliffs. So I'm back again. What he received was truly precious. It was the knowledge that his strange return to the past was not a one-time thing, which meant that he was not done fighting. Giving him a nod, Nephi's went about asking Cassie to use the guiding light to locate Effie. Sonny, meanwhile, remained motionless. He was somewhat lost in thought. First of all, stay calm. His behavior up until now had been nothing short of embarrassing. Of course, there were extenuating circumstances. During his first round, Sonny had been barely conscious of the fact that time was repeating itself. During the second try, he was still reeling and in shock from dying gruesomely at the hands of undying slaughter. But this was his third attempt. This time, he had to maintain his composure and not lose control. No, not quite right. Who was to say that this attempt was his third? It was only the third attempt since he had become aware of the fact that everything was repeating itself. There was no telling how many times he had died before that. Still deep in thought, Sonny glanced at Nephi's and Cassie. He remained motionless for a few moments, then silently walked over to Nightmare and adjusted the stirrups of the overpriced saddle to make it easier for the blind girl to mount. Soon, they abandoned the ship and stepped on the white sand of the misty beach. Sonny walked in the back, looking down with a somber expression on his face. He did not react in any way when the Sin of Solace suddenly appeared from the fog. The sword wraith stared at him mockingly, calling the shadows. Shame, the only thing you achieved was getting them killed, like you get everyone else who follows you killed. Hey, here's an idea. How about you ask Nephi's and Kasha for help next? Sonny spared him a grim look, causing the Sin of Solace to cover his mouth with a hand theatrically. I've said a bit too much, haven't I? Sonny looked away. It is as I thought. It seemed that the sword wraith had become aware of the fact that time was repeating itself long before Sonny. What was it that the Sin of Solace had said the last time? I am actually starting to enjoy this. Let's go for another round, shall we? Back then, Sonny had only paid attention to the fact that the wraith was behaving differently from the past, unlike everyone else. But now, it was clear that the apparition had already known about the twisted nature of time on Windflower. Come to think of it, had it not been the inconsistency of how the Sin of Solace behaved that first alerted Sonny to the anomaly? The wraith had stared at Sonny silently, and he turned to ask if the bastard was not going to say anything. The odd feeling that eventually allowed him to realize the truth started gnawing at him after that. The time is repeating itself. Sonny looked into the fog. A few moments later, he sighed deeply. I'm such a fool. The great river was a river of time. Windflower was surrounded by a mystical whirlpool, and what did whirlpools do? They spun. The water caught in them revolved in a circle. So the time here must have revolved in a circle too, forming a loop. It was an outlandish theory, but not an entirely baseless one. In fact, it could explain a few things. Why the ancient stone steps did not look weathered at all, for example. How Effie and Jet could have survived an entire year on this island despite their flaws. Oh wait. If Effie and Jet were caught in a loop of repeating time here on Windflower, then was Undying Slaughter caught in it too? She had not shown any signs of knowing what Sonny would do in advance, which meant that she did not know about the loop and therefore had no means of escaping it. How had one of the dreaded 6 plagues ended up being trapped here? More importantly, why was Sonny the only one who seemed to be aware of the loop? He frowned. After a few moments, his eyes widened slightly. It's not me, it's the Sin of Solace. The sword wraith seemed to have been aware of the loop from the very beginning. He was somehow immune to forgetting the events of every previous revolution. Was it because the cursed sword was innately tied to truth and revelations, which it was supposed to grant its mad wielder? Sonny was not particularly mad, but the Sin of Solace was a part of his mind, a splintered and twisted one, but a part nevertheless. Was it possible that he had slowly become contaminated by the knowledge the sword wraith possessed, somehow? Or that the awareness of the loop was one of the revelations of madness granted to him by the cursed sword? Sonny did not know the exact reason, but he was certain that it was because of the sin of solace that he had become aware of the circular nature of time on Windflower. His thoughts turned somber. The how and why are clear, now what? Undying slaughter was far more fearsome than Sonny had expected. He had lost to her bitterly, which was not to say that he could not win. If Sonny entered the battle with Nephi's nightmare, Cassie, and her echoes, if he prepared better, he would still probably lose and watch everyone die. For the first few times, at least few dozen times, few hundred times. If the loop was infinite, it did not matter. Sooner or later, he would learn enough and find a way to kill Undying Slaughter. But was the loop really infinite? And even if it was, what would killing Undying Slaughter even achieve? She would come back to life as soon as the next revolution started, just like Sonny had been coming back to life. His face suddenly paled. Is it all meaningless? Fighting Undying Slaughter, saving Jet, searching for Effie. It was indeed meaningless if he did not know a way to escape the loop. But was it even possible to escape it? It has to be. The Serpent King had come to Windflower and returned after all. There was a way, so Sonny just had to find it. First and foremost, he needed information. How did the loop function? What were its boundaries? When did time terminate and turn back? And much, much more. I need to learn all kinds of stuff. The future promised to be rather interesting. And incredibly tiring. Sonny shuddered, imagining how many more times he was going to die. By the time the three of them reached the line of footsteps in the sand, Sonny had formulated a rough plan of what he had to do during this particular revolution. Well, it wasn't much of a plan. There were too many paths he could take, so he simply chose one that was the closest. Jet was not that far and had to know more about what was happening on the island than he did. So, Sonny was determined to find her before Undying Slaughter did. He was not enthused about the idea of fighting the dreadful wraith again so soon. Luckily, there was a high possibility that he could snatch Jet and escape without exchanging a single blow with the defiled. What I need right now is not strength but speed. Sonny glanced at Nephi's and Cassie. He would have to share his knowledge with his companions sooner or later, without a doubt. Just imagining that conversation made him uncomfortable, though. It was a rather bizarre thing to say to someone, that they had been living the same hour over and over again without ever realizing it. I'll tell them the next time. Hopefully, there will be a next time. Sonny suspected that the loop was endless. It should have existed for as long as the colossal whirlpool existed, which had already been hundreds of years, but he couldn't be sure. So, for now, he had to treat each revolution as if it was the last one. I'll tell them after I'm back then. Sadly, he had already wasted a lot of time coming to this realization, so there was none of it left for lengthy explanations. Noticing his intense gaze, Nephi's looked at him and raised an eyebrow. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, considering his words carefully, then opened his mouth and said just three of them. Aster Song Vale. Her expression changed slightly, becoming darker and more intense. It was not exactly the same murderous reaction as she had showed on the Ashen Barrow, but Sonny still felt a little uncomfortable. Nephi's frowned. Why? She paused for a moment, then took a deep breath. Are we under a mind hex again? Sonny shook his head. No, but something similar. Right now, I need you two to not ask questions and do what I tell you. Can you do that? Cassie had turned around in the saddle, a troubled expression appearing on her face. She remained silent, though, waiting for Nephi's to speak. Neph stared at him for a few long moments, then nodded slowly. All right. Sonny sighed with relief. He knew that she trusted him, but blindly trusting someone was not easy. It was even harder to suppress one's curiosity. Personally, he would have had a lot of trouble both with the former and the latter. He forced out a smile. "Good, then return to the ship and hide. Stay safe until I return." Sonny had no idea if returning to the chain breaker was indeed safe, but it was the best temporary solution he could come up with. Turning to Cassie, he added, "I'll need Nightmare." The blind girl swiftly dismounted, allowing him to hop into the saddle. Looking down, Sonny lingered for a moment, then commanded Saint and Fiend to protect his companions. A moment later, he was galloping through the fog. He wanted to avoid fighting undying slaughter, which meant that he would not need his combat shadows. If he still ended up facing the Mist Wraith, summoning them to him would take only a couple of moments. Faster. Nightmare, however, was the fastest of his followers. His speed was far superior to even Sonny's own, as well as that of his shadows. To find Jet and bring her away from the misty forest unscathed, Sonny would need his steed the most. He sent all 5 shadows to augment the dark destrier. The 2 of them flew along the line of lonesome footprints, swiftly approaching the wall of black cliffs. The black stallion scaled the stone steps without ever slowing down, his adamantine hooves sending sparks flying from the black rock, the melodious staccato traveling through the mist like the rumble of war drums. Soon they entered the forest. Sonny was way ahead of the previous revolution. Jet should not have entered the clearing yet, so she could be anywhere. That was a problem, considering that he did not dare send his shadows to scout anymore. Quite a predicament. He could use the silver bell to point Jet in his direction. The problem was that undying slaughter would recognize its ringing as well. Not to mention that there were most likely other deadly creatures on the island. It was a shame that the guiding light pointed to Effie, but not Jet. Otherwise, Sonny would have taken it with him. Nightmare reached the clearing where Sonny had died the last 2 times, or however many times it really was, and crossed it in the blink of an eye. She shouldn't have come from the direction of the beach, so the most logical choice is to continue toward the tower. The fog veiled everything, making the world appear only a couple dozen meters wide. Damn it! He could stumble on Jet at any moment. However, he could also stumble on undying slaughter at any moment. Sonny was hesitating to send his shadow in all directions after all, when he suddenly smelled it. The stench of blood. Following his mental command, Nightmare slowed down and then came to a halt. Sonny looked around, inhaling the wisps of mist, then sent his steed toward a particular tree. The ancient pine reached further than he could see, but there, on its bark, was a spot much darker than the rest of it. A bloody handprint, as if someone wounded had leaned on the tree trunk. He spun in the saddle and finally noticed another bloody print. That gave him a direction to follow. Coincidentally, that direction led back toward the now distant clearing. Sending Nightmare into a gallop, Sonny feverishly took in his surroundings. Despite the fact that the trunks of the tall pines were flying past him with terrible speed, he still managed to notice the marks. Sometimes there were bloody handprints on the trees. Sometimes there were drops of blood on the ground. Sonny guided his steed to follow the bloody trail. And then finally, a human figure appeared from the fog, leaning heavily on a tree. She was hunched and pale as a ghost, but her glaive was raised, ready to attack. He heard a hoarse whisper, "Come get me, wench." It was Jet. A moment later, the image of an infernal black stallion appearing from the mist reflected in the icy depths of her piercing blue eyes, with a rider in a flying black mantle leaning low in the saddle. Her pupils widened in astonishment. Sonny." Extending a hand in Jet's direction, he shouted. No time to explain. Her hesitation lasted only for a split second. Dropping the glaive to the ground, Jet reached out with her own bloodied hand. Grabbing it, Sunny pulled. A moment later, Soul Reaper was sitting right behind him, clutching onto the folds of Anank's mantle. The glaive disappeared into a rain of sparks. Sunny commanded Nightmare to get the hell out of the misty forest as soon as possible. As the shadow carried the two masters away, Jet leaned forward and asked in a pained voice, "I'm not complaining, but how the hell are you here?" He grinned. What a complicated question. How else? I came on a ship. Sunny did not guide Nightmare directly back to the chain breaker. He had managed to follow Jet's bloody trail after all, so Undying Slaughter would most likely be able to as well. Since Sunny did not want to lead her to Nephi's and Cassie, he had to cover their tracks first. The problem was, he didn't really know how to do it. Tracking was one of the basic skills taught during the Wilderness Survival course, which obviously covered covering the tracks as well. But he needed to know the capabilities of the enemy to know how to hide from them, and Undying Slaughter was still largely a mystery. Remembering the line of footprints leading to the edge of the island, Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then turned his steed to the left. They were still moving in the general direction of the cliffs, but to a point far removed from the stone steps. With winds whistling in his ears, Sunny raised his voice slightly. "Where's Effie?" There was a lot he had to ask and tell Jet, but this question was the most important. He both dreaded and couldn't wait to hear the answer. She remained silent for a moment, probably wondering how he knew that the two of them had been together, then said in a stifled tone, "I'm not sure. We were separated in the vortex." Sunny's expression fell. He gritted his teeth, then forced himself to calm down. "It's all right." It was better than all right, really. Judging from Jet's words, Effie was most likely still alive. The loop had even conveniently solved the dire problem of her flaw. Here on Windflower, she would never starve to death. Sunny hesitated for a moment. Can this be why Undying Slaughter is here too? The Mist Wraith possessed the same flaw as Jet, which meant that she had to kill in order to survive. That might have been fine back when the forces of the defilement were besieging the cities of the Sibyls. But now that these cities were gone, what was there for Undying Slaughter to slaughter? "Sunny, I need to warn you, I'm being pursued by..." Jet's voice was pained and hoarse. The corner of his mouth twitched. "I know, let's talk later. For now, hold on tight." Just then, Nightmare reached the border of the forest. Escaping the line of tall trees, the black stallion rushed across the narrow strip of empty land between the forest and the edge of the cliffs. His hooves left a line of prints in the soft moss. Reaching the very edge, the dark destrier did not slow down at all. Instead, he accelerated even more and leapt forward, soaring high into the air above the hidden chasm of the dark abyss. Jet let out a stunned yelp. Dismissing the shadow, Sunny spun, grabbed onto her, and summoned the dark wing. Before the momentum of Nightmare's leap fully dissipated, the translucent cloak manifested on his back and turned into a blur. The two of them glided down slowly, moving along the surface of the weathered black rock. Sunny felt his arm, which supported Jet's back, become soaked in blood. His expression darkened. He had not noticed before, but there were more wounds on her body than he thought. Soul Reaper grimaced, enduring the pain, and then said with a bit of dark amusement, "You really know how to make a girl squeal, don't you, Sunny?" He froze for a moment, mortified. A terrible despair grasped his heart with icy claws. No, it can't be. He knew this feeling. Had Jet spent too much time with Effie? Had she been corrupted by that vulgar, foul-mouthed lecher? Damn it all. Uttering a quiet curse, he adjusted the direction of their flight and answered through gritted teeth, "I guess." Despite her pained expression, Soul Reaper let out a laugh. They were rather far away from the misty beach, so it took a while to glide back to it. Sunny had to approach the cliffs and push them up a few times, afraid that they'll fall beneath the island. However, the wall of black rock gave away eventually, and they entered the familiar bay. Landing on the white sand, Sunny put Jet down and supported her. His gaze was a bit worried. "Can you walk?" She nodded. "It's all right, that thing didn't get me too bad, so I'll live." Jet grinned. She was not going to bleed to death anyway. In the worst case, she would just revert to a more corpse-like state. Sunny studied her for a few moments, then nodded. "Let's go then, our ship is not far from here." They walked into the fog. Soon after, they were in the main cargo hold of the chain breaker. The air here smelled of blood, but Jet looked much better, even though Nephi's had not recovered enough essence to use her healing powers yet. Both she and Cassie possessed memories capable of treating small wounds. It was one of the benefits of belonging to a great clan. Jet had dismissed the upper part of her armor and was sitting on a crate, her torso wrapped in bandages. There was a generous amount of food on another crate in front of her, as well as fruit juice and freshly brewed tea. She was devouring the improvised meal voraciously. Crow Crow was sitting on her shoulder, seemingly enraptured and glued to his master. From time to time, Jet absent-mindedly fed it a piece of fruit. Nothing had found and attacked the beached ship yet, but Sunny was still tense. At the same time, he felt incredibly relieved. It was so reassuring to have Jet here with him, alive and relatively unscathed. Nephi's and Cassie seemed elated too, even if they weren't as close with the infamous government master. Their group of 3 had become a group of 4. Good. Another great thing about bringing Jet back was that Sunny was going to have an easier time explaining things to everyone. When she seemed to have satiated her hunger somewhat, he leaned forward and said, "All right, now I'll try to explain a few things." The 3 women looked at him expectantly. Sunny hesitated for a few moments. "You know where we are, right, Jet? In general, I mean." Taking the cup of tea and cradling it in her hands, she nodded. "Yeah, we are inside that weird pyramid. Somehow, this place is the Great River, which is supposed to flow endlessly from the future into the past." He sighed in relief. It seemed that Effie and Jet had learned a few things about the nature of the third nightmare as well. Indeed, because of the nature of the Great River, there are all kinds of strange things happening to time in this nightmare. For example, Nephi's and I have been here for about 4 months now, but Cassie has been here for more than a year. Nephi's and Cassie nodded calmly, since they had already known that fact. Jet, however, seemed perplexed. "What?" Sunny looked at her, lingered for a moment, and said, "Yeah, what about you?" Soul Reaper suddenly seemed uncertain. She touched her hair briefly, then blinked a couple times. "About 2 months. Effie and I were sent to the same place 2 months ago." This time, it was Neff's and Cassie's turn to look stunned. "How can that be?" Sunny smiled faintly. "I'll explain in a bit. But first, Jet, can you tell us what has happened to you too?" She took a sip of tea, then smiled back at him. "Sure, why not?" Jet's icy blue eye grew a little distant. "The 3 of you must know more about this place than we do. Look, you even have a ship. Effie and I, we weren't that lucky. The people whose roles we've taken belong to a tribe of river nomads. Their ancestors were the survivors of one of the destroyed cities, I think, but these guys, they had already regressed into abject savagery, which is not that surprising, really, considering how they lived." She sighed. The river nomads did not have a place to live, constantly migrating instead. They rode sea creatures as steeds and hunted weaker abominations for sustenance. When defiled or powerful nightmare creatures appeared, they ran. Actually, their way of life was really ingenious and tenacious. I have never even thought that it was possible for humans to live entirely in the water without ever stepping foot on land. Cassie tilted her head a little, confused. "These nomads, they were riverborn." Sunny was confused, too. How could riverborn lead nomadic lives? Weren't they bound to a span of the great river they were born on? Jet nodded somberly. Yeah, that was why they regressed that much, that quickly. The nomads lived very short lives, you see. No generation lasted more than a couple of decades. They rarely remained as children for more than a year or two and were expected to join the hunts immediately after. If there was danger, the older generation was sacrificed to let the younger one escape. Even if there was no danger, they had to follow the abominations they could hunt. So, she shook her head. They might have looked like adults, but in reality, it was a tribe where no one ever reached adulthood. They were all ignorant, savage kids. Soul Reaper leaned back, fed her crow echo a grape and grimaced. Well, by the time Effie and I came around, it could barely be called a tribe. There were maybe a dozen people left. All the other nomad tribes seemed to have gone extinct already as well. We were most likely the last. Her expression darkened slightly. So we tried to keep them alive and find out where we were, what was happening, and how to conquer the nightmare. It took us some time to learn how to live the lives of the Great River nomads. In the process, we also learned from the surviving tribesmen about the tomb of Ariel, the Great River, the defilement, and the fall of the river cities. Oh, and we fought plenty of nightmare creatures. Well, I did at least. Jet stretched and then winced, briefly touching one of her bandages. Everything went, if not well, then at least all right, until we stumbled on an especially powerful swarm of the drowned. Our tribe, at that point, there were no children among the nomads anymore, so there was not even a point in trying to run. In the battle, everyone was killed. Only Effie and I managed to escape. Sunny noted that Jet and Effie remained outsiders despite having taken the roles of two riverborn people. It was an interesting fact. Meanwhile, she shrugged and continued. Usually, our mounts would have been fast enough to give a slip to most enemies, but the drowned pursued us relentlessly, as if it was their life's mission to obliterate all nomads. The sea creatures we rode had also been wounded in the battle, so they were gradually slowing down. After about a week of running away and fighting pitched battles with those bastards, we got lost in the mist and then sucked into this whirlpool. I only managed to send my echo out, hopping against all hope that Crow would manage to find one of you. Soul Reaper looked at the blackbird and smiled. Then her smile faded slowly. Effie and I were separated while trying to reach the island, and here we are, I guess. Nephi's glanced at Cassie, then frowned a little. What do you mean? How long have you been here? Jet looked at her with surprise. There, the moment of truth. She scratched her head. A couple hours. I landed, tried to search for Effie, and got lost in the mist. Then that thing attacked me. I managed to flee, but she would have probably finished me off soon if not for Sunny. Talk about a prince on a white horse. Who needs one when there's a pauper on a black horse, right? Soul Reaper grinned and downed the rest of her tea in one gulp. A satisfied expression appeared on her face. Nephi's and Cassie, meanwhile, seemed troubled. The blind girl frowned. But how is it possible? Your echo arrived at Fallen Grace many months ago. Jet stared at her, bewildered. What? Wait. I thought that you guys were already on the island. Wasn't that why Crow was able to find Sunny so fast? Cassie shook her head. No, we only ventured to find Windflower after learning that the two of you were here. Soul Reaper leaned back. That doesn't make any sense. Everyone grew quiet, failing to understand the strange discrepancy. In that silence, Sunny finally spoke. It's because time moves in a circle on this island. Nephi's, Cassie, and Jet stared at him incredulously. Pierced by three intense gazes, each belonging to a beautiful woman, Sunny shifted uncomfortably and pulled on the collar of the Shroud of Dusk. I think I really need to start socializing with guys more. Why am I always surrounded by lethal beauties? Eventually, Nephi's repeated his words evenly. Moves in a circle. Sunny nodded. Yes, I only became aware of it a few hours ago, or a few revolutions ago to be precise. Think about it, the waters of the great river represent time, and we are surrounded by an enormous whirlpool. So, he pointed to Jet. You only remember being on Windflower for a couple of hours, but in fact, you've been here for almost a year. The time you spent in the nightmare is the same as Cassie. Looking at their tense expressions, Sunny sighed. Well, in fact, what I said earlier is not entirely accurate. It seems that Nephi's and I entered the nightmare 4 months ago, while you and Cassie entered it more than a year ago. But there is no telling how many times the time repeated itself before I became aware of the loop, so, although I don't think that it's the case, we might very well have been stuck on this island for 100 years. There's no way to tell unless we leave. Everyone remained silent for a while. When the pause grew too long, Cassie finally asked in a hesitant tone, "These previous revolutions, do you mean that we have already explored the island several times, but you are the only one who remembers it?" Sunny's face grew dark. He looked away, grimaced, and then said somberly, "Explored the island? Not really. We barely left the beach when Undying Slaughter attacked Jed in the forest. Each time, I went ahead to try and stop her, and each time I died miserably. Jet too." Soul Reaper threw a sharp glance at him and paled a little. It was not a pleasant thing to hear that you had been killed. The corners of her mouth twisted into a dark smile. "How regrettable." He sighed. "This is the first time I managed to live past an hour, so I don't really know much about the loop yet. I'm sure it doesn't terminate each time I die, which means that Nephi's and Cassie must have lived longer. You might have even survived long enough to reach the termination point. But since your memories are erased between revolutions, it's impossible to tell." Nephi's raised an eyebrow. "Why are you the only one who remembers?" Sunny pointed to the Sin of Solace, the sword, not the wraith, which lay on a crate nearby. "I suspect it has something to do with this cursed sword of mine. Its spirit was actually the first one to show signs of knowing about the loop." She seemed to accept the explanation after thinking about it for a few moments. Jet sighed and leaned forward to pour herself more tea. Cassie gripped the guiding light tighter, lost in thought. After a minute passed in silence, Nephi's looked at Sunny and asked, "What is Undying Slaughter like?" His expression froze. Struggling to suppress an involuntary shiver, Sunny lingered for a few moments and then said evenly, "She's a horror." He grimaced and then described his encounters with the defiled monstrosity in as much detail as he could. As he did, the faces of his companions grew more and more somber. Eventually, Nephi's briefly glanced at Jet and then looked away. "Formidable. If we attack together, what do you think our chances will be?" Sunny slowly shook his head. "At least some of us will die, all of us most likely, especially with how low on essence you are." She sighed. "Then we avoid battle for now." He blinked. "For now?" Nephi's looked at him and shrugged calmly. "We'll have to face the 6 plagues eventually. Now, however, is not the right time." Sunny was a little bit aggrieved. Did she not hear how absolutely terrifying that thing is? But then again, it was Nephi's he was talking about. Actually, it was already incredible that she had not suggested attacking Undying Slaughter right away, saying something like, "It's just a defiled version of one of the most deadly masters in the world, but long past reaching sainthood." That was personal growth right there. Cassie slowly shook her head. "We might avoid fighting Undying Slaughter, but I don't think we can avoid battle." Jet looked at her curiously. "What do you mean?" The blind girl hesitated for a moment. "If it's like Sunny said, then I finally understand why this place feels so dangerous. Think about it. Previously, we only knew that no one returns from Windflower. Human ships, the defiled nightmare creatures, very few things that enter the whirlpool can ever escape. I assumed that all these beings had perished here somehow. But if some of them are trapped in this time loop just like us. Her face paled a little. Then this island is teeming with all kinds of abominations that have been caught, but managed to reach the island instead of being swallowed by the vortex. How many of them must have accumulated here over the centuries? How many horrors are hiding in the mist? Cassie shook her head. If the time loop really exists, then Windflower it's like a monster preserve. An uneasy silence settled in the cargo bay. Everyone's expressions grew ugly. A monster preserve. Sunny looked resentfully into the distance. She was right. Considering the pulling force of the vortex, all kinds of abominable creatures must have been caught by the whirlpool over the centuries. Most of them had perished in its depths, but plenty would have managed to reach the island. And since time here was stagnant, moving in a circle, all of them were still here, good as new. A chill crept up his spine. This place, just what kind of hell was it? Nephi's, meanwhile, rose and put her hand on the hilt of her sword. Her usually impassive face was somber but determined. Be that as it may, our goal still remains the same. The rest of them looked at her silently. She frowned. Our goal was to find Effie and Soul Reaper Jet, then return to Fallen Grace. We are still missing Effie, so, no matter if there is a time anomaly or not, nothing really changed. We have no choice but to venture out, find her, and escape. Sunny gave her a grim look. There is one problem, though. Who is going to fuel the chain breaker with essence? Yours is already consumed, and it won't be sufficiently replenished anytime soon. Nephi shrugged. You can do it as long as we time our escape and leave at dusk, or dawn. He sighed, then stood up and nodded. All right then. I agree, the longer we wait, the higher the chances are that Effie will meet fatal danger. Let's make a detour to avoid undying slaughter and follow the guiding light deeper inland. Jet winced but stood up too. Her bandages were painted red by blood. Count me in. Finally, only Cassie was left sitting. She glanced at the sacred staff in her hand, then rose and took a deep breath. No time to waste then. After spending a little time to discuss their strategy and prepare, the group left the chain breaker and stepped on the white sand once again. Sunny had managed to survive longer than an hour. He had avoided clashing with undying slaughter and even rescued Jet. And yet he was not very reassured. As the cohort left the chain breaker behind and ventured into the swirling mist once again, he was not confident that they would survive at all. In fact, he dreaded Windflower even more. How many times do you think you can die before sanity abandons you completely? The sin of Solace, who was walking alongside him, was not helping at all. The sword wraith laughed. Considering how thick your skull is, I'd wager a few dozen times more. Yes, after that, you'll probably turn into a drooling fool. Gods, I wonder if I'll still be stuck with you after you've become a vegetable. Trying to ignore the infuriating apparition, Sunny kept his eyes on the fog. In your dreams. He only had to take one look at Nightmare to know that a few dozen deaths would not break him. The sin of Solace was simply gloating. A few years of torturous deaths, though. We need to escape this horrible place as soon as possible. The cohort was advancing up the beach in a similar formation to the previous revolutions, but now Jet was walking behind Sunny and Nephi's. Cassie had summoned her echoes as well, who were now moving in front of Nightmare. Together, they represented a formidable battle force, and yet Sunny did not know if their power was enough to survive the suffocating fog of Windflower. I'm starting to understand why there are so few saints around. This time, they chose a direction opposite of where the stone steps and undying slaughter were. Instead of moving directly toward the cliffs, they followed along the edge of the island, eventually reaching the border of the bay. There, they ascended the wall of black rock and reached the plateau above. Sunny used Shadow Step to arrive there first and guarded the landing until the other members of the cohort climbed up. By the time everyone did, the second hour since their arrival on Windflower should have been well over. Above the cliffs, it was the same landscape. A forest of tall pine trees stretched in front of them, white fog swirling between the ancient trunks. Being in the mist had felt suffocating from the very start, but now that Sunny knew that a dreadful wraith could be hiding in it, the feeling grew 10 times worse. The echo of the Sibyl glided forward, the hem of her red dress hovering just above the moss. The rest of them followed. They followed the soft radiance of the guiding light into the murky depths of the forest. The fog swallowed everything behind, muffling the sounds and flowing slowly between the ancient trees. A few minutes passed in tense silence, then a few more. It was hard to keep track of time in this misty limbo, but eventually, Sunny judged that another hour had passed. At that time, Nephi's raised a hand and said, "Stop." She seemed to have recovered from essence exhaustion, enough so, at least, to regain access to her dormant ability. Now that she had, Jet could finally be healed. Sunny and Cassie watched the fog as Nephi's placed her hands on Soul Reaper's back. They shone with soft white light, and soon, Jet's face cleared. She took a deep breath and smiled in satisfaction. At the same time, Neff's eyes grew a little cloudy. She sighed softly and took a step back. If Sunny did not know better, he would not have suspected that she was enduring harrowing pain. "Let's continue." They were about to move again when Cassie suddenly turned her head. The blind girl remained motionless for a moment, then jumped down from Nightmare's back. "Something is approaching. Get ready." "Curses!" Sunny snarled, holding the Sin of Solace in one hand and the Cruel Sight, in its short sword form, in another. Nephi swiftly drew her longsword and dismissed its scabbard. Jet raised her glaive into a high stance. Saint, Fiend, Nightmare, and the two echoes moved to surround the humans in a protective circle. The quiet dancer floated up and hovered above Cassie's shoulder, its tip pointing into the depths of the forest. Everything grew still for a moment. Sunny stared into the swirling mist, not knowing where the attack would come from. He couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything. Even his shadow sense was suppressed. "Above us." "Damna." Before he could finish the thought, something massive fell on them from above. "It's Yan." It was a huge, grotesque nightmare creature that resembled a carcass of an enormous black leopard, its bones protruding from the rotting flesh. Its tail was abnormally long, segmented, and ended in a revolting circular maw that brimmed with needle-like teeth. The creature's own yellow canines, though, were much more terrifying. Each was as long as a greatsword and covered in dried blood. The abomination was so large that its shadow covered the entire cohort. Much worse, the moment Sunny saw it, he felt an invisible pressure wash over him, filling his heart with a sense of dread. It was a great beast. Before the monstrosity could plummet on the cohort, two towering shadow tentacles rose from the ground and entangled its front limbs, slowing the creature down. The beast's skeletal jaws snapped viciously, obliterating the manifested shadows in an instant, but it gave the members of the cohort enough time, at least, to dash in different directions. The abomination landed on the spot where they had been a split second ago. The ghastly tail of the creature was already shooting back with terrifying speed, its circular maw open to bite into Cassie's flesh. The blind girl sidestepped, barely avoiding being torn apart by it, and brought her staff down on the segmented tail. A moment later, she was flung aside like an ant. On the other side, the beast swiped its rotting paw in the direction of Sunny and Nephi's. Augmented by the shadows and soul flame, both managed to dodge the lethal blow, even if it was just by a hair's breadth. But as soon as they did, the creature's jaws were already in front of them, ready to snap shut and turn the two humans into chunks of torn meat. Neither Sunny nor Nephi's had regained their balance yet, There was no time for them to evade. Luckily, at that moment, Saint crashed into the side of the abomination's head, using her shield as a siege ram. The power of the blow was terrible enough to bring a fortress wall down, but the skull of the great beast only swung to the side a little. It did not seem as if the creature had sustained any damage at all. And all of that, from the moment the creature landed to now, only took a split second to happen. Not good. The azure serpent had been a king among beasts, while this one was merely a beast, and yet it was a great nightmare creature. It was too powerful, too fast, and too resilient. Can we defeat it? Sonny knew that they could. With his shadows, Cassie's echoes, and especially the crown of dawn, they had a non-negligible chance of defeating this monstrosity. However, they could also all die here. I don't want to die. Even knowing that he would most likely return to the starting point of the loop, Sonny still shuddered at the thought of having his flesh torn apart and his bones ground to dust. He was even more reluctant to watch his companions be killed by the ghastly abomination. It's simple, don't die then. Gritting his teeth, he lunged forward. The quiet dancer zipped through the air and hit the base of the great beast's revolting tail. However, the sharp tip of the temperamental echo bounced off the tough hide of the creature without leaving even a scratch on it. At the same time, Fiend growled and put himself in the path of the creature's crushing paw. The towering ogre was barely able to grasp it. The decaying claws of the abomination struck him on the chest, leaving deep grooves in the black silver. The ground under the gluttonous shadow caved in, but he remained standing. For a moment, then the horrid beast pushed Fiend down and covered him with its massive paw. At the same time, Saint dodged the snapping jaws and lashed out with her sword, leaving a thin crack on the creature's skeletal snout. The dead Sibyl and the clockwork swordsman attacked the enemy from behind. Nightmare rammed into it, lowering his head to gore the abominations with his horns. Then all of them were flung aside. The steel mannequin dissolved into a rain of sparks, destroyed. The Sibyl collided with a trunk of an ancient pine, shattered it into splinters, and fell to the ground, unmoving. Nightmare barely managed to dissolve into the shadows in time, but still lost a large chunk of flesh. Saint blocked the blow with her shield and slid a dozen meters back. The shadows and the echoes only lasted a second against the great beast's fury. But that second gave Sonny time to call upon the shadows and manifest them into the shadow-spawn shell. He wished he could assume the form of the onyx serpent, but it was poorly suited for battles on land. A tide of darkness flowed from the open gate of the shadow lantern, rising to form into countless chains. They bound the ghastly creature like ropes, but were torn apart a moment later. Sonny, Nephi's, and Jet launched their attack. Neph's silvery longsword ignited with blinding radiance as she dove under the abomination's jaws and thrust her weapon into its neck. Sonny delivered a devastating blow to the monstrous leopard's snout. Empowered by the crown of dawn, the sin of solace sent a few small fragments of bone flying. Jet lunged at the great beast from the side, aiming to plunge her glaive into its very soul. But before she could, the long, flexible tail of the horrid creature whipped around. Jet barely managed to avoid it by dashing back, while Sonny was not so lucky. His movements were suppressed by the need to keep himself away from the harrowing jaws, and so, the circular maw at the end of the segmented tail greedily closed on the side of the shadow spawn. The right shoulder and side of his shell were entirely destroyed. Sonny instantly lost 2 of his 4 arms. One simply disappeared, the other fell apart, revealing shredded human flesh beneath. Neph's sword pierced the great beast's neck, but before she could deal significant damage, a lightning-fast strike of a mighty paw destroyed the radiant blade and sent her rolling away. Sonny stumbled back, desperately trying to prevent his shell from crumbling and using the shadows of the misty forest to try and hastily repair the damage. They had managed to make the great beast bleed, or rather, delivered it a wound. The decaying creature did not seem like something that had blood running through its veins. However, does it even mean anything? Just in a few seconds, one of Cassie's echoes had been destroyed, while the other one was heavily damaged. Nightmare was already wounded. Fiend had escaped from beneath the creature's paw, and Saint seemed unharmed as well, but Sunny himself was already injured. His arm was a mess of torn flesh, and although he would not suffer from blood loss, it was in a bad state. Would they be able to kill the ghastly abomination? For a split second, the violence subsided. Nephi's had nimbly jumped to her feet and was already summoning a different weapon. Jet had regained her balance. Sunny switched to a one-hand grip and prepared both of his swords for an attack. Saint was already closing distance. Cassie was moving forward, the guiding light shimmering in the fog. The decaying leopard opened its skeletal maw and let out a chilling, gurgling growl. When Sunny heard it, his vision blurred slightly. A mental attack. His resistance to mind attacks was high enough to shrug it off, but he felt cold dread nevertheless. Handling the overwhelming physical might of the enormous great beast was already close to impossible. If the abominations possessed more means of subjugating its enemies, this battle would swiftly turn from ugly to hopeless. It was then that another sound reached their ears. Echoing eerily in the fog, a loud crack resounded, as if a tree had snapped and was falling somewhere in the forest. The horrid leopard suddenly froze. Its skeletal snout turned, and it lowered its body low to the ground. The segmented tail rose like that of a scorpion, protecting the creature's back. What is this? Why did it look as if the great beast was afraid? Before Sunny could really react, the abomination suddenly moved and rushed away, disappearing into the mist. The wind risen by its departure threw Neff's hair into disarray. The members of the cohort remained motionless, confused and unnerved by what had just happened. Keeping their weapons in defensive stances, they covered each other's backs and stared tensely into the fog. What is going on? Jet's voice sounded grim and hoarse. The thick fog veiled everything around. All they could see were the nearest trees and the cold ground under their feet. The ghastly leopard had disappeared like a ghost. There was nothing left but silence. Then another loud crack resounded somewhere in the forest, followed by a muffled rustling. Sunny spun, trying to pinpoint where the noise was coming from. There was another echoing crack and then another, louder one. Because of the mist, it was hard to tell where the trees were falling and why. However, the cracks were growing closer. Damn it! Slowly, the disparate cracks grew into a cacophony of noise, and Sunny felt the ground quaking beneath his feet. Then, everything suddenly grew silent once again. Standing back to back with Nephi's, Cassie, and Jet, he stared into the fog, feeling cold sweat rolling down his face. The blind girl suddenly shifted, sharply turning around. Following her motion, Sunny saw something dark flying at them from the mist. Cursing, he dodged and felt a large object hitting the ground behind him. Spinning around, Sunny raised the sin of solace and froze. His eyes widened. Out there in front of him, laying on the ground, was the ghastly leopard, or rather, its head. The skeletal snout was shattered, and the gaping hollows where the abomination's eyes should have been were dark and empty. There was nothing below the creature's mangled neck, but it did not seem as if it had been severed. Instead, it seemed as if someone or something had violently ripped the abomination's head off with nothing but brutal strength. The great beast was dead. Sunny couldn't help but tremble. What the hell? What could have ripped a great beast apart? Flinching, he forced himself to look away from the revolting head and peered into the fog. Where is it? Where? He couldn't see anything. He couldn't hear anything. He couldn't sense anything. Sunny gritted his teeth and forced himself to calm down. Cassie. Even if he didn't know from which direction the attack would come from, Cassie would. She could see a few seconds into the future. After all, it was all but impossible to get her by surprise. Turning slightly, Sunny tensely studied the blind girl. She was holding the guiding light in front of her, ready to deflect a sudden attack. It seemed that she had not felt anything dangerous yet. Maybe it's go. But then Cassie's shoulders trembled slightly. Her aspect ability had shown her the future. She did not turn to face the unseen enemy, though. Instead, her hands dropped, and she lowered her head. Which meant that in the future Cassie saw, there was no escape. Sunny stared at her in disbelief. No. A moment later, he was swallowed by a heavy shadow. Looking up, Sunny saw a hand stretching toward them from the fog above. It seemed like a human hand, except that it was almost the same size as the great beast had been. He could see the lines on the giant palm, and the blackened, broken, bloodied nails at the ends of the long, bruised fingers. The giant hand moved deceptively slow, but before Sunny could even blink, it was already upon them. Without ever slowing down, it smashed into the members of the cohort, squashing them like bugs. Sunny died. This time, his death was mercifully swift. Sunny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened. The deck of the chain breaker felt solid under his feet. This time, he simply peered into the fog instead of looking around, not that he could see anything. His gaze was dark and hollow. I failed again. His face was pale and unmoving. In front of him, the mists of windflower flowed slowly, swirling in indifference as they devoured the world. Everything was as it had been before. Nephi's and Cassie were talking about the guiding light. With no one noticing his hollow eyes, Sunny lingered for a while, then walked over to Nightmare. He reached to adjust the stirrups and froze. After a moment of hesitation, Sunny climbed into the saddle instead. His companions looked at him in confusion. Sunny. He stared into the mist. Stay here for a while, please. I'll be back soon. With that, Nightmare leaped off the deck of the chain breaker and carried him into the fog. Damn it, damn it, damn it. The ghastly leopard had already been bad enough, and yet, Sunny felt that the cohort would have been able to slay the dreadful creature, if at a steep cost. But that bloodied hand. They had not even caught a glimpse of the nebulous being that wandered the mist, snapping the towering pine trees like matchsticks. It had torn a great beast apart and obliterated them so casually. How was Sunny supposed to contend with something that oppressive and ineffable? It felt as though something was pressing down heavily on his heart. Was it fear? Damn it! Gritting his teeth, Sunny guided Nightmare into the misty forest. He spent some time searching for Jet, found her, and brought her back to the chain breaker. He waited for her to explain how she had ended up on Windflower, then told everyone about the time loop. There were some deviations from the previous conversations, but mostly, it went almost exactly the same. In the end, Nephi suggested going after Effie once again. Sunny stared at her in silence, remembering the brief but gruesome moment of all of them being crushed under the giant, bloodied palm. Then, he shook his head somberly. We tried already. As I said, it didn't end well. Nephi's met his gaze, a subtle frown twisting the beautiful lines of her face. We can do better this time. What's the alternative? Give up and run. She shook her head. No, we can't even run away until nightfall. Before then, you won't have enough essence to empower the chain breaker and carry us across the vortex. Sunny sighed and rose to his feet. Glancing at his companions, he said, I agree, we must continue trying. But we don't need to keep trying the same thing. Our combined strength is not enough to brave the mist, at least not when we don't know anything about the dangers it hides. Jet leaned back, then winced when her wounded back touched the bulkhead and returned to her previous position. So what do you suggest? Sunny shrugged. Use speed instead of strength. The group of us was intercepted and killed, but a single swift scout can make it through. Basically, I'll go retrieve Effie the same way I retrieved Jet. You three stay here, recover, and treat her wounds." Nephis lingered for a while. It was hard to read her expression, but she seemed reluctant to let Sonny take all the risk. "I don't like it." He shrugged. "What does that have to do with anything? Like it or not, that seems to be the best option right now." They discussed the situation some more, but in the end, Sonny managed to convince the other members of the cohort to stay hidden aboard the chain breaker. It wasn't that unreasonable anyway. Nephis was suffering from essence exhaustion, Jet was heavily injured, and Cassie did not possess a lot of physical prowess. Despite her insidious aspect, she was at her weakest in battles against overwhelmingly powerful adversaries. Considering her lacking physicality, an enemy who was fast, strong, and inevitable enough would leave no opportunity for the blind girl to exploit. Sensing a few seconds into the future was useless if those seconds did not allow her to change anything. "I'm going." Saying those words, Sonny once again rode Nightmare and dove into the mist. "I can do it, can I do it?" This time, he was holding the guiding light in his hand. The softly shining crystal at the tip of the sacred staff was pointing deeper inland. However, Sonny couldn't follow its guidance directly. Somewhere out there in front of him, undying slaughter was hiding in the mist. To his left was the territory of the great beast, the decaying leopard. That was also where they had met the harrowing giant the last time. So this time, Sonny turned right. Reaching the end of the beach, he and Nightmare turned into shadows and scaled the black cliffs. Sonny had passed this way once already, the first time he had carried Jet back. However, that time, they had been moving along the outer border of the island, so he did not know what was waiting for him on the surface. There was only the same forest and the same fog. Leaving the shadows, he sent Nightmare running across the narrow strip of land between the edge of the cliffs and trees. It was some time before the trees receded, and the forest suddenly came to an end. Sonny stopped his steed, looking forward tensely. In front of him, the pine trees gave way to an open field. Most of it was obscured by mist, but he could see vague shapes rising from it like tall pillars. They emanated a chilling, dire, and vaguely familiar feeling. Sonny hesitated for a while, then turned into a shadow and cautiously slithered forward. Soon, the tall shapes revealed themselves fully. He grew somber after recognizing them for what they were. The towering pillars were, in fact, giant bones. The entire shore in this part of Windflower was littered by them, as if it was a graveyard for all kinds of gargantuan beings. From the look of the ancient remains, the leviathans that had left them behind were all nightmare creatures, abominable, dreadful, and appalling dwellers of the depths. Sonny was both shocked and unnerved by witnessing the skeletal remains of so many depth dwellers. Had their bones been carried here by someone? Had the abominations come to this shore to die on their own over the ages? Or had there been a titanic battle here that led to all these monstrous creatures being slaughtered by an unknown assailant? He did not know. What he did know, however. Suppressing his panic, Sonny hid in the skull of an especially large creature and looked ahead. There, no more than 24 meters away from him, something dark and massive had just moved in the fog. Sonny would have held his breath if he wasn't a shadow at the moment. Out there in front of him, something massive was hiding in the fog. If not for the slight movement just now, he would have mistaken it for another pile of towering bones. That movement might have saved his life. Curse it! Because of the mist, he could only see a vague, dark shape. The details were obscured, and he could tell that the creature was enormous. It also instilled him with a deep, bestial feeling of dread. A strange, sweet smell permeated the air. Sonny froze, hiding in the skull of a dead leviathan. He did not know what to do. Moving forward was out of the question. but moving back could potentially inform the enemy of his presence as well. That only left Shadow Step. However, before he tried to slip away, Sunny lingered for a few moments. Something was gnawing at him. Why did this presence feel familiar? He had felt a strange familiarity ever since entering the monster graveyard. It was faint, but unmistakable. Why? Had he been to this part of the island already, in one of the revolutions that he did not remember? No, that did not make any sense. Before becoming aware of the loop, Sunny had to have repeated the same actions over and over, going forward alone to rescue Jet, and dying to Undying Slaughter's ghostly blade. So how could anything on Windflower feel familiar? At that moment, a strong gale blew from the direction of the vortex, and the mist receded. The giant creature hiding in the fog was revealed in all its eerie, grotesque beauty. Sunny shuddered. The massive shape he had noticed was a revolting butterfly. The butterfly's wings and back were black, but its body and underbelly were the color of white bone. It had 6 long, seemingly fragile legs that ended in sharp points, and 2 enormous, faceted eyes that were like orbs of pure darkness. Between them was a disturbingly long, oily black beak, which was currently bent into a spiral like an elephant's trunk. 2 long antennae rose from its head. The eerie black butterfly was about 100 meters in size. It was the same great monster that had battled the Serpent King for an entire month for the right to devour the remains of the black turtle. The dark butterfly, what is it doing here? For a few moments, Sunny's mind was in turmoil. He had traveled so far into the past from the beginning of the nightmare, and yet this grotesque horror somehow ended catching up to him nevertheless. Had it been following him and Nephi's from the start? But then Sunny felt a hint of relief. Although this abomination was almost exactly like the great monster he was familiar with, it was also subtly different. The pattern of bone-white scales on its belly was not the same. The jagged edges of its wings were not the same. The length of its antennae was not the same either. Sunny had been staring at the original dark butterfly for an entire month, so he remembered its ethereally alien appearance in perfect detail. This one might have belonged to the same tribe of nightmare creatures, but was a different abomination altogether. Which was not to say that it wasn't equally harrowing. Damn it! First a great beast, and now a great monster. Just how impossible was this third nightmare supposed to be? And here he was, hoping that things would go easier if he chose a different path this time. Sunny swallowed his resentment and stared at the gargantuan abomination. The thing was much larger than the chain breaker. If they tried to fly away from the island and were caught by it in the air, there was no doubt what fate awaited them. Things had just gotten much more complicated. I'll have to go around the monster graveyard for now. The mist was already flowing back to hide the eerie creature. Before it did, Sunny followed a whim and peered into the soul of the dark butterfly, wanting to make sure that it, too, was a great monster. Then he froze, dumbfounded. A few moments passed before a coherent thought could form in his mind. And what? Beneath the surface of the aerial giant's carapace, where the tendrils of the revolting darkness were supposed to be, there was nothing. There were no nodes of spreading corruption, and neither were there radiant suns of shining soul cores. Instead, the creature's soul was empty. No, there was no soul inside that monstrous body at all. The dark butterfly was. It's hollow. Sunny knew of awakened who had lost their souls in the dream realm, and were left as empty shells, living, but truly dead. However, he had never heard of anything similar happening to nightmare creatures. How could it if abominations did not travel between the two worlds in their sleep? Their rotten souls were always safely anchored within their bodies. Of course, if an abomination's soul was somehow destroyed without damaging the body, there was a small chance that the body would continue to live on, empty and void of conscience. He hesitated for a few moments, and then cautiously left the skull of a dead leviathan. Sliding closer to the giant butterfly, Sonny extended his senses and studied its shadow. The shadow was empty, like the shadows of all inanimate objects were. The dark butterfly that had frightened him so much, was it no threat at all? Sonny remained in the form of the shadow for a while, observing the gargantuan creature. The great monster sat among the bones with its wings laying listlessly on the ground. It seemed to be breathing, but other than that, it remained absolutely still. Its giant, faceted eyes were dull and empty. After a while, Sonny returned to his tangible form and cautiously approached the creature. Even when he walked to stand under its terrifying beak, the dark butterfly did not react. It truly is hollow. He hesitated for a few moments, then looked down. There, in the shadow of the creature's wings, clusters of revolting eggs were embedded into slimy cocoons. Each egg was twice the size of Sonny and translucent. He could see the viscous, milky liquid and the shapes of giant worm-like larvae within. The shadows of the eggs were just as lifeless as the butterfly itself. Sonny stared at the eggs for a while, then threw a glance at the great monster. Then, holding his breath, he walked forward and sliced one open with the sin of solace. The revolting larva fell apart and convulsed, dead. However, the spell did not announce a kill. He did not receive shadow fragments either. There were no soul shards in the repulsive flesh of the dead, giant worm. Ihalu. Sonny shivered. What is going on? Suddenly terrified, he backed away, then turned around and walked into the mist. It took him a lot of effort to not run. All of it, the torturous deaths, the suffocating mist, the orchard of ancient bones, the hollow monster, was too much to endure. Walking among the remains of dead horrors, enveloped in milky fog, Sonny couldn't help but feel that this hell was everything there was to the world. Everything else, all that existed in his memory, felt like a strange, distant dream. Climbing into the saddle of nightmare, he raised the guiding light and slumped, trembling. After a while, he said hoarsely, "And let's go." Soon, the towering bones disappeared into the mist. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.